Are you ready to thrive? As a trauma therapist, author, yoga instructor, and healed human, I personally and professionally know what it means to live stuck in survival mode. I've learned a few things in my healing journey and my career that can help you transform into your best self. Join me, Rebecca Case, as I use neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, and personal experience to help you find the tools and techniques to thrive. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Thrive the podcast. This is your host, Rebecca Case. And today I am super excited to have one of my very dear friends and most trusted colleagues, Alison Leslie, joining us to talk about animals, the human-animal bond, why your pets are so important in your life, and how we can understand how animals can support our neurobiology and help us to live a thriving life. So welcome, Alison.
Welcome. Thanks so much. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me on to talk about one of my most favorite topics, our pets and the way they support us.
I'm so excited to talk about this. I love my fur babies. And it's so cool to learn about the neurobiology of why we love them so much. So, but first, will you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are? Anything personally and professionally that you want to share about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I am a therapist in Bloomington, Indiana. I include my own kiddos, a dog, a cat, and a bearded dragon in my family. I grew up with animals, and my first career was in the human-animal bond, animal-assisted social work. So I really love including animals, both in my personal life and in my professional world, and helping people stay curious to how their pets and therapy animals in general can support so many different things about ourselves. And I'm really blessed to do what I get to do, which is really play with animals and meet people where they're at. And so, yeah.
So I have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and you taught me something a little while ago, actually, when Alison and I have spent a bit of time just talking about animals, and I've learned a lot from her about how impactful the human-animal bond is when it comes to thriving and just living your best life and dealing with difficult emotions and the grief of losing a pet and all those things. And you mentioned just something to me not too long ago about how when you come home from work, when you come home from your day, your kids are kind of like, hey, it might not pay any attention to you, but that your dog is always thrilled to see you. And I've just really been paying attention to that when I enter my house, or even I work from home. So when I walk out of my office, I always have one or both of my dogs at my door, so excited to see me, like as if they haven't seen me for months. And it feels so good to see that kind of constant engagement and pure joy of here's my person. Right?
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could lean into that a little bit for our listeners, because I found that to be a really impactful insight.
Yeah. Well, when I think about, coming home from a trip or just being in the space, I have always leaned on my animals as being, the most excited, right? Who really wants to be with me? Who is choosing, right? My kids are sometimes just, I'm their parent, so they must live with me, which they will tell me from time to time, right? But my animals are choosing to be in this relationship with me. They don't have to come, right? Harry, my current dog, he doesn't have to meet me at the door. He wants to meet me at the door. He sees me and he lights up. And that doesn't happen every single time I walk in the door and my partner is there or my kids are there. So the felt sense of I'm wanted, I'm accepted, I'm connected to a living being, right? As I walk into that door, really gets to fill me up in a different way than maybe when I was with my clients or on my drive home, or if I was somewhere different, right? It's this experience of, and I don't have to do anything. I'm literally walking in the door. I'm not on in any way. I'm not, doling out treats as like a reward for them. It's really just that we've created this relationship that makes them excited to be in my presence. And that is really like so nourishing to feel and to allow in, especially when you take the moment to pause and observe it, instead of just being like, oh, hey, and moving in, which you can do really quickly, right? Shedding all the things or getting into dinner. And I really invite myself to really pause on that moment and let it kind of come into me that this being in this moment is excited to see me, and is welcoming my whole being back without any expectation of what I'm going to do next.
It is like this unconditional positive regard, adoration, really, right?
Yeah.
At least from dogs. I mean, my cats don't behave like that at all. They're like, oh, hey, you again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But our dogs, right, are just so usually very adoring and like the definition of what it means to be in love with another creature.
It really is. And I think back, to one of my other dogs, Maribel, who was not as, jumping out at the chance to like come say hi to me, but I didn't take it as personally as I might, if my children ignore me. I'm just like, oh, that's Maribel. And I accept her personality as just like more laid back, as more like she's kind of ruling the roost. I need to come to her. And then she'll wag her tail, or she'll wag her tail as she, was laying on the couch. She wasn't like trying to get up and move around so much. That was just her. But that I was able to accept in a very different way, I think, and probably taught me some lessons about moving towards or away from relationship that might not be so overtly yay all the time.
So I feel like you've already been speaking to this a little bit, but how can we understand the value and the impact of the human animal bond when it comes to just our neurobiology and how that helps us to thrive?
It's a really good question. There's so many different ways, I think, or avenues to take with that question. What strikes me most is, we have so much research on the human animal bond, especially with equines and with canines, right? And so we're talking more a little bit about companion animals, those animals that are in our homes, that are providing something for us, and how that impacts our neurobiology, how our animals in these spaces, right, help us access safety, how our animals can be attachment figures. Research shows, that we have proximity seeking. We lean into our animals. It meets all of those attachment requirements. And so when we have these living beings in our homes, that we have a reciprocal relationship with, and we have consent in that relationship, we're not forcing anything to happen. We're in the moment with them. That really impacts our internal felt sense, that we both get to be in kind of relationship, and that can be called co-regulation, right? So when we're co-regulating with any living being, if that animal feels safe and calm and connected, that helps us feel safe and calm and connected. I think the other thing that's so important to notice with our pets is that they're not overriding their nervous system, right? They're not sensing something and saying, oh, but we're going to ignore that. They're so good at sensing and noticing something and then doing something about that. That might be getting a drink of water. That might mean barking at the, UPS driver for the 100th time that day, but they're doing what they need to do. And that is something that we can learn from them, but we can also stay curious too if we're sensing a danger in some way, or our neurobiology is triggered because there was a loud noise or because something happened. We can turn to our animals and see, what are they doing, right? If they're relaxed, then that can be a signal to ourselves. It's called bioaffiliative safety. So there's a term for that says we can include their nervous system as a cue to our nervous system, that it's 2024 and that we're actually okay right here, right now. So I think that's super important to stay curious too. So when you're feeling a trigger or you're unsure of what's happening in the moment, look to see what your animals are doing. If your dog is resting, right, or he's trying to play with you or she's trying to play with you, then that might be a cue that everything in this moment is actually okay. So I think that those are the things that I kind of like to lean into, both for myself and as I talk about the human animal bond, both, these relationships that have consent, have choice, are persistent, they're ongoing, and they can help us create these pockets or these moments of like down regulation of it's okay to be okay. And that sometimes is very challenging.
Wow. That's so interesting. And I'm just noticing how I'm personally connecting with all of that. I mean, certainly the co-regulation, when I feel dysregulated, I'm like, I need to go find one of my furry critters, and snuggle with my cat or play with a dog or just snuggle with one of my dogs. One of them does not like to be snuggled with, but the other one,
right.
She's like, you can't snuggle me enough. There's no such thing. But absolutely, I do notice that I pay attention to them, especially when I'm out on hikes or when I'm home alone and their behaviors to monitor my safety. Yeah. So I was out with my 2 dogs a couple of weeks ago on a hike. And at the beginning of the hike, there was a sign that there'd been a bear and cub sightings. And unfortunately, the sign didn't say how long ago it was. Sometimes they leave those signs up for like months to years. And so I'm like, I don't know if this is recent. I had a moment of my nervous system just like, oh, okay, like watch your safety. And then this voice in me also chimed in and said, but you're not walking alone. You have these 2 little fur balls with you, and they're going to let you know probably before you would know anything because of their scent, because they're so engaged in their environment. And that allowed me to feel safer on that hike, where I just felt like I'm not responsible for monitoring my safety by myself.
Yeah.
I have these 2 creatures that are also on the lookout. And that was really helpful. And even when I'm home alone, when my husband travels for work sometimes, when I'm going to bed at night, that's always a little cue for my nervous system of you're home alone, like nobody's here. And I just remind myself like, yeah, but you have 2 very loud dogs. Bark at anything, whether it be squirrels attacking the backyard or a UPS driver or somebody that I really need to be aware of. Like they will let me know.
Right. And there's, I hear like connection and belonging and community in that, right? I'm not alone. And so often we can feel that we are. And when we get to remind ourselves we're not, there's this other living being here that cares about your safety. That wants to also make sure you're safe. We joke around that, if an intruder came in, would Harry like lick them to death, or what would he do? And because he's so friendly, but I really think he would sense that this is a danger, and he would, when we're home or when my husband isn't home, he'll tend to be louder in his bark, especially at night, or he'll howl a little actually. And that's not, when we're all just home in the middle of the day, not something he usually does. So they really are just as invested in our safety. And you see that, in all types of, anytime you're on social media, right? It's like, oh, this dog, saved this person, or, we see those stories all the time. And it's because they're true.
Yeah. So I was also thinking about how, especially our dogs, I would say my cats too sometimes. So when I'm really upset, if I'm crying, or if I'm really mad about something, or even if I'm hurt. So if I'm making, expressions or sounds that say like, I am injured, I am hurt. It's funny. The hurt thing gets my cat's attention. My cats will come running in if they think, like, one of my dogs and I were wrestling around and she like bit me accidentally when we were playing tug, right? Like she just missed the toy. And I said, ow. One of my cats comes charging down the stairs and was like ready to beat her up. Like, you hurt mom. And my 2 cats, if one of them, not both of them, but one of them, if they hear, like there could be somebody at the door that they don't know. She'll come running in like she's so fearless. Like, what is she going to do? But it's really adorable. She's like, I'm ready to protect and defend. But I noticed last night, so I was looking at the news on my phone and there was something really upsetting that I read. And I just said out loud something like, oh, fuck no. Like just something that I was clearly like in my tone of voice. And I was just talking to myself. There was nobody else in the room, but it was this exclamation of just like complete and utter disappointment and sadness for this, tragedy that I was reading about. And my dog immediately gets up. She was sleeping. She comes over. She stands on me. She's like 30 pounds. So I was sitting on the couch and she comes and stands on me and she like gets right up in my face and is really trying to soothe me. How can we understand like what's really happening in that moment, why our dogs might respond to that? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, that's such a great noticing. And I'm sure anyone listening has probably a very similar experience, right? Either in their lives today or from the past of something happening inside of them and their animals kind of knowing, even maybe before they do that, oh, there's something going on with me. And, I'm not an expert in like the neurobiology of animals necessarily, but I think that what we may be staying curious to is our animals' innate sense of what's happening around them, right? Because that's how they stay safe. And so when they can get that felt sense in the air that something's wrong, or my person that I've chosen, right, is having an experience, it's helpful for them to soothe us. It also helps their neurobiology, I would imagine, right? So it's kind of when they co-regulate us, we are probably co-regulating them at the same time. And how we get to stay curious to how much of that, right, we want in that moment, or we need in that moment, right? Another person might say, oh, okay, well, you're 30 pounds and you're right here. I need you to like back away a little, and we can do that in relationship, right? In this relationship, I can have boundaries. And so I might say, hey, right here next to me. And, that is something we can negotiate in that moment. But I think that our animals' innate senses, just like you said on that hike, they're going to be aware that something's off. They're going to sense something in that environment. They're going to smell something. We also know that our animals have a very acute sense of smell, and that if we go into our sympathetic experience, or we might have a little dump of cortisol, right? Who knows all these things that our animals are sensing into that let them cue them into, hey, something's not okay with my person, and I'm going to let them know that. And that I think speaks to that bi-directional relationship that we have with our animals when we're in a really true human animal bond, that it is back and forth. It is persistent and ongoing. It's reciprocal. It's all those things. And so they're also making the choice to say, hey, I want to help my person.
That's so fascinating. So another question I wanted to ask you is how we can understand the grief that we feel when we lose a pet. I feel that is something that, so years ago, my father passed away in a very tragic way. He ended his life by suicide. And 4 days before that happened, my dog suddenly passed away. She was fine. And then all of a sudden she was really sick and we had to send her over the Rainbow Bridge. And as I was grieving all of that, I mean, certainly not having my dog when I was grieving the loss of my father was like super, super hard not to have my emotional support animal there. But I can't say that like the grief that I felt for the loss of my dog felt any less or lighter or easier than the loss of my dad. In some ways, it almost felt harder because she was constantly in my life. She was part of my daily routine. She was part of my like daily co-regulation. And I just feel like that's something that gets dismissed a lot, oh, your dog passed away. Like that's not a big deal. But for a lot of us, it can just wreck us. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that and offer our listeners some validation for what that's like.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's so hard, especially when we're going through multiple losses at the same time. But the loss of our pets, right? We want to remember that they're our chosen family members, that they, again, have loved us really unconditionally, and that they were those supports that were there kind of every moment of the day, and in our fun times and in our hard times, just being present. And so when that loss happens, it's overwhelming. Research shows it's actually, right up there with a family member, if not worse than a family member. And so when people dismiss that, or we, get the sense of we should dismiss it, right? Oh, well, when we get that narrative, well, it was just a pet, right? When we want to kind of disenfranchise our own grief, or, disenfranchised grief is kind of that grief that isn't always allowed to be witnessed or seen, right? Especially in your community or in our kind of culture. It makes us almost say, well, what's wrong with me that I'm so upset about this? And the truth is, there's nothing wrong with you. You are really losing potentially one of the most true, one of the most consistent, one of the most predictable, and one of the most unconditionally loving relationships you may have ever experienced in your life. Also, our pets are with us during large swaths of time. So they've been with you, through these different experiences, and to kind of look back on everything that they've been with you, they've supported you through, right? It's moves, it's, relationships, it's friendships, it's schools, it's, maybe even if it's your family pet, right? Going to college, right? There are so many experiences that your animal goes through with you, and that we go through with them, that of course that's going to be a huge gap. And then I think the other challenge is then that the being who would be the one to support you in that grief is actually the one you're grieving. And so who you might traditionally turn to help and support you isn't there. And I think that can also add to that grieving process. And, when we lost all of our pets, we lost all 3 of our dogs in a year. And it was horrific. And when Ray, our last dog, had passed away, and then it was just quiet. There was we didn't have any other pets. And we had really been used to the sound of animals, right? Greeting us at the door. The sound of their pitter patter on the ground. Having to feed them, seeing all their stuff all around, right? The silence of not having them there is a reminder that they're gone and that we don't have them to turn to. I think that really also contributes to the challenge in that experience. And so I really, hope that those of you who are listening, who have gone through this, who didn't give themselves maybe the opportunity, or who, your work didn't say, go ahead and, of course, this is hard, or who didn't get seen in that, right? That grief. I hope you can all feel that it's true. And if you ever need somebody who can see you in that, to really come back to this, because it's so hard, and it really should be acknowledged more openly. When pets pass away and you put that on like a social media, for example, so many people respond to that because they've been there. And I think that that's the other challenge, is so many of our community members know what that's like. And yet we still have this, experience of discounting it. And so hopefully, as more people talk about the challenges of losing their pets, it becomes more open, and it becomes more visible and more acceptable to really spend time grieving, because they're our most important relationships.
Yeah, they really are. Thank you. That's so validating, I'm sure, for so many people, and even for myself. And it makes me just think we should have our pets written into our bereavement policies, right? If you have a bereavement policy, it should be your immediate family members and pets.
Right. So many people anymore consider, their pet's an immediate family member. I mean, I remember when our kids go to the doctor and they're little, they're like, who's in your family? Well, they include their pets, and, Ray and Maribel. And that just comes out of them because they are their family members. Even as I introduced myself today, I talk about my kids, but I also include my animals because they are an immediate part of my family. I don't go on vacation without considering what am I going to do with them, right? I'm not going to go somewhere and think about, oh, well, how long am I going to be gone for? They're always in our considerations because they are our family members.
Yeah. So as we start to get to the end of our time here, I'm wondering if you could maybe offer our listeners who have pets a way to kind of going back to where we started of just, when you're noticing these moments of connection, like how to really pause and let yourself attend to that, be present with it and soak it up because it's really good for your nervous system. Could you give us like a little like step-by-step guide of what to maybe do next time you come home and you see your dog wagging its tail at the door or, your cat's being super adorable, rolling around on the bed?
Yeah. So as you kind of invite in some curiosity around how your pets are choosing you, right? How they're choosing to be in this space with you, how maybe they're greeting you at the door or they're laying on the couch next to you or begging to go on that walk. Stay curious for a moment, kind of how that lands, what you notice inside. That might be something on the skin. It might be something kind of in the air around you, or it might be a felt sense somewhere. And if that feels okay to invite yourself to notice for an extra moment, I might suggest that you kind of lean into that, noticing what is that felt sense when I'm with my animals. And if you have the opportunity to be in their presence in that moment, to take in their expression, to take in their body language, right? It's probably relaxed. It's probably excited to be here. And they might be looking up at you, right? With those really big eyes and giving you a message that maybe you need in that moment. And so if it's possible to pause and feel that felt sense and then see what it is in their own way they want you to know, that might be about you, about this moment of time, then that might be a really nice way to start to to receive what they're giving, right? Because they're always giving us something. And we can get so much in routine of noticing that they're there, but not really allowing ourselves to let that kind of sink in. And so just pausing for a few moments to feel that, to notice the emotion of that acceptance, to notice the felt sense of it, to hear what that would want us to know about ourselves, I think could be really, really important. And then the other thing you could stay curious to doing is, it's called a consent test, and it's giving your animal a pet, for a few seconds and then pausing. And if they want to be pet again, they're going to lean in. They're going to do something. They're going to flip your hand. They're going to, nudge into you in some way. And then that's their invitation to keep going, right? And so those are also really fun ways to know that how you're including your animal is the way the animal also wants to be included. And if they say, that's enough, then that's also just what they need in that moment. And how you get to notice how you can respect their needs as they respect yours, I think is such an important back and forth of this experience too. And who doesn't love when they're petting their animal and they pause for a minute and then that animal chooses to be like, hey, no, we want more of that, right? And how that message can really be received as well.
That's so sweet. I am going to infuse a little bit of my spiritual practice here. So for listeners, you can take it or leave it. But in my yoga philosophy training and learning, one of my teachers taught me that, there's a little bit of God or the universe in all of us. We're in essence just kind of all little versions of God. We're all little versions of the universe, of Mother Nature. And so sometimes when I'm really engaging with my pets, I just think like, oh, look at these little gods that I have the opportunity and the privilege to care for in my life. And especially I have a border collie and a cattle dog. So they are very rambunctious and they're very loud and they're always protecting me from squirrels in the backyard and delivery drivers. So sometimes when they're just hooting and hollering, I just remind myself like I have some very loud little gods in my house. They're just my little gods that I get to care for. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And what an honor it is to get to care for them.
Yes, it is an honor.
Yeah.
Well, Alison, if people wanted to find you or connect with you, or you've also done some writing, whether that's in the professional psychotherapy community or not, where might they find you? Where can they check you out?
Yeah, so you can check me out, I guess, on my website, AlisonLeslie.com. It's ALISON. Leslie.com, or just shoot me an email at Alison@AlisonLeslie.com. I forgot to mention I'm an EMDR therapist and a somatic experiencing professional as well. I work just in that healing world. And I also do a lot of training in animal assisted therapy and animal assisted education, animal assisted services. So if you ever are interested in ways to start this work or to stay curious to the human animal bond in general, feel free to reach out. It would be great to connect.
Thanks, Alison. We'll be sure to link your website in the show notes if anybody wants to connect. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been just so lovely, so sweet.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Thrive the Podcast. I hope these insights inspire positive changes in your life. If you're ready to take the next step in your Thrive journey, check out goodies linked in the show notes and on my website, RebeccaCase.com. Sign up for my newsletter and get access to helpful resources, connect with my community, and be the first to know about events and happenings. Remember, your journey from surviving to thriving is unique, and you have the power to create your best life. Subscribe, share, and thrive into your potential. Until next time, this is Rebecca Case, signing off. Thrive on.